amateur presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled movie review at TIFF 22. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside. He's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Matt, it's day 6 of the Toronto International Film Festival. I have no idea what to say at this point.
Pause. Yeah.
Dramatic effect.
We just had some pizza?
Yeah, we were halfway through. Things are starting to kind of die down a little bit in terms of the press and industry side of things.
Yeah,
and now
even
it's
the premieres. Like tonight, I feel like is the last kind of...
Well, Triangle of Sadness, Women Talking, movies that we've already seen, but, you know, that it's now starting to have the premieres and it's kind of like the tail end of it. I mean, once King Street, you know, is reopened, it kind of is the signature, kind of like the beginning of the end kind of thing.
But today, on this episode, we are reviewing Sam Mendes's Empire of Light, which had its North American premiere at TIFF, right? Or did it play Telluride?
It played Telluride.
Oh, so Canadian premiere.
Canadian, yes.
Here at the Toronto
premiere.
I always get confused because Telluride does their announcements so late, and it's like almost like the first weekend of TIFF or right before it, so I don't even like pay attention to what plays there. Women Talking, same thing, got a surprise premiere there as well.
And it's not really a surprise because if you read the writing of how the TIFF descriptions come out, like what,
but
like if it's a North
changes,
American,
though.
right?
But sometimes they're
usually
announced
you can get
as
a
a North
tip
American, and then they change to Canadian or something like that. Anyways, Empire of Light.
This is inside baseball stuff.
This should be. We're not too far off on this movie. I think I was a little hotter on it, and then I softened as we talked after the movie. And then there are a lot of elements I really like, but. We'll get into it. You kick it off.
Well, yeah. So Empire of Light is Sam Mendes' kind of ode to the cinema, the savior of that experience, that communal experience that you have, whether it be in a small town or at a place that's kind of more populated. The idea of getting together and seeing something in the dark and enjoying, whether it be an hour and a half, 3 hours, and having that experience. And
especially back in the day when they had these big
these kind of giant, kind of like classically made and structured movie theaters that maybe had 4 to get all together picture houses, as they would even be called back
usually
in the day.
1 to 4 before the multiplex.
And this is kind of like, it's not that theaters are dying in this movie because it takes place in the early 80s. It kind of begins at the end of 1980 and comes into 81 specifically, and you'll see a lot of marquees with films like The Blues Brothers, Raging Bull, The Elephant Man, Stir Crazy, and posters throughout the theater. But the idea of that, these like classic kind of sort of independently owned movie theaters that we rarely have anymore. Now it's mostly multiplexes and things like that, but even they're dying out. But this is going back to a time where it was like a pure experience. Yeah. And so this movie takes place in a English seaside kind of town that is either a place where people live that isn't necessarily, the most kind of classically kind of train kind of place. Like it's more of a vacation spot, so if you live there, you kind of the novelty of that is worn off. You know what I'm trying to say? Yeah. So I'm rambling a little bit. It's late and I'm waiting for the caffeine to kick in. But yeah, so essentially you have this seaside town in England in the early 80s, and the story is focused on 2 characters, one played by Olivia Colman, who plays Hillary. She's a duty manager, and she specifically works at the concession stand of this Empire movie theater. And as we're introduced to her, a new employee is hired and brought on, Stephen, played by Michael Ward. And it's their relationship evolving over the course of the film and sort of learning about them as characters, but also their shared love of working at this movie theater, ? And yeah, it's a very kind of sentimental, feel-good movie. The savior is cinema, and how this is an experience that cannot be replicated at home or shouldn't be taken for granted. On top of that, you have a lot of social political issues with the rise of racism and neo-Nazis in the Margaret Thatcher era. You also have depictions of mental illness that are maybe handled rather clumsily. The film kind of gets lost in its own design, especially when it comes to the whole point of the movie, which is about the love of film. The Michael Ward character, Stephen, is someone who continually says, I love movies, and it really doesn't come through, where, the few scenes we have with Toby Jones as the projectionist, that's the character that is kind of, living and breathing it on a technical level, where Stephen is interested in it from the point of view of architecture. And we see that a little bit in that first act, right?
It's a lot of telling, not showing, which I think is the movie's biggest problem. Because we've talked about this a lot since we've seen it, but it had all the ingredients to be kind of a special movie, because it's a movie about movies. It's a movie about going to the movies or the place where you watch movies. And oddly enough, that's a topic that we bring up all the time on our main show and things like that. You know how obsessive both myself and Eric is about kind of the presentation of going to the movies and how that's kind of gone away. And I love that idea of romanticizing that. And even the idea of, even in 1981, that was starting to go away, right? Like, it was kind of at the time where even those big, monolithic kind of church-like cinemas were kind of starting to fade away a little bit, because multiplexes would have been introduced probably around that time or soon after.
Well, you talk about Odeon Theaters, right? Which is kind of a multiplex chain in the UK.
And then going back to the ingredients, so you have that, which is an interesting topic, I think. It can be overdone, I know that. But then you have Roger Deakins shooting the movie. You have Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross doing the score. You have a great actor in Olivia Colman as your lead. And it should have been something great. And unfortunately, I think the movie kind of loses itself and loses focus, pardon the pun, for like a film projection kind of thing. But I just feel like, it started really strong for me. Like, I love Deacon's cinematography. I liked the romanticizing of the kind of monolithic church-like cinema. Like, it was beautiful. Like, I loved the lighting. I loved this look of this theater. I loved the group of people that worked at this movie theater, because, like, again, some personal experience. Like, I worked at a Cineplex. Obviously, it was 25 years after this movie takes place. But
before you were born.
Even more than that, maybe 35 years.
It'd be
25
40
years. No,
you're talking about
me working.
So I thought you meant like how long
2006.
between now and yeah. Gotcha.
Anyways, but all of that, I was like, okay, I'm kind of into this. Like, and I love the idea of it. And then I feel like the movie, maybe after the first act, kind of falls into this love story. Falls into kind of this story about mental health and about, the political
the civil unrest of England at the time, with the skinheads and neo-Nazis.
And I just feel like it kind of loses itself, and it doesn't really know what it wants to be. Like, is it an ode to, like, a love letter to going, like, these big cinemas? Is it a story on mental health? Is it a story on racism? And I just feel like
and ageism as well, because you mentioned the crew that works at this theater. It's a combination of a lot of young people that are kind of either getting summer jobs, or it's for them to save up money to get ready for college. And then you have someone like Olivia Colman's character Hillary, who this is kind of she's a lifer basically here,
and that's very common too.
Yeah.
Like, your managers are usually older than you and things like that.
And I think that's kind of interesting as well, but it does, it gets away from that quite early on, to the point where the script does feel somewhat underdeveloped and a little lacking in confidence to stick with the main point it's trying to make about the dying of this art form and this practice of going to a theater that has multiple levels and is beautifully structured, but is also kind of decaying, and it's kind of also a metaphor for the Coleman character having there's only so much of this person's life left, and this person is kind of going through some things, and part of them is kind of cut themselves off emotionally, so they maybe don't feel worthy of love and that kind of thing. And it kind of feels like this is a really half-baked idea by Mendes, and he had what if I centered this movie at a theater that maybe I went to during a summer vacation with my family, or a theater that I remember fondly, because if when you watch this, you being from the GTA, we'll think of theaters like the Roxy or the Royal or the Fox, things like that, where this movie is trying to distill that. I think the film that actually does this better, and it's not even about movie theaters, is First Reformed. I think First Reformed does a better job in terms of showing you the old church that Ethan Hawke is working in versus Cedric the Entertainer's mega church, which is the old theaters are dying out, and what's left, people are running to the populist version of the theatrical experience.
And how that is juxtaposed with your lead characters and stuff too, right? And it just never really gets to that point, and it kind of, like I said, after that first act, you start to go, oh, okay, this movie's now something else, and then you're like, okay, I don't know if it's doing this super well. You have great actors, and Deakins, even I feel like he loses himself halfway through, where it still looks nice, but it's not that interesting looking after that first act for me.
No, it feels like it's a project that
Reznor and Ross.
Yeah, it feels like a project that Sam Mendes is like, look, we worked great together on Skyfall. Let's do it again. But watching it, it's not that it's a bad looking movie or there's anything necessarily wrong with it, but it just kind of feels like a film that any really good cinematographer could have shot. Why have it be Deakins? Why?
I think all that stuff at the beginning, up until there's a moment with some fireworks, that I think I like everything up into that moment. And I was talking to our friend Shaq about this today, and he said the same thing. He's like, up until that fireworks moment, I was kind of in on it, and then it completely loses me. And I even think from the cinematography and score standpoint, at the beginning, I'm like, ooh, this sounds like Reznor and Ross. I'm all in on this. And then even they kind of go away. It's like everyone kind of goes away and then comes back at the end and never earns any of its emotional beats. It never earns its love for cinema beats. Cinema does save people, I think, and it is an escape for people, and it does help you during really hard times, or maybe it just helps you to kind of forget about stuff and just go somewhere else or see someone else's, sit in someone else's shoes for a while. But in the movie, the way that that's all handled, it just kind of, again, goes back to what I said, is it tells you, it doesn't show you. Prove to me that these people, this is that for these people, when they kind of just go, no, it is that. They tell you that, and then it kind of just happens, and you're like, that doesn't feel super earned at all.
Yeah, and there's a couple eye-rolling metaphors, I think, with a pigeon with a broken wing being nursed back to health, and where that goes is kind of eye-rolling, even though the location where they're shooting it
cool,
is interesting. I think Michael Ward's character's love of movies isn't really developed in any way. It kind of feels like, again, there's nothing wrong with being a casual
or anything like that either,
or being a casual moviegoer,
which is fine, but
he always talks about being such a film fan, and you would never get that other than the one scene where he's talking to Toby Jones's projectionist. Is he an architect and interested in sort of design and things like that? Yeah, absolutely. You see that come through.
And I do like that scene because it actually features something specific about the movies back then, of changing reels and using the dual projector system and stuff like that. That is kind of interesting, but to your point, it's the only moment where you see him really kind of showing that, oh, I'm super into this. And even when he references movies he likes and things like that, it's I don't necessarily buy it. And then for when the Coleman character ultimately,
Coleman's character should have been the projectionist, and that I think would have been a more interesting dynamic there, because then you could connect it right back to movies that way. But it kind of feels secondhand.
Who doesn't care about the movies, right?
No,
like that would be
it's
interesting.
just his job.
Yeah, just their job. Like that would be interesting, right?
Yeah.
And then learning from someone else who's not a projectionist, who is obsessed with movies, or even to your point of like that, juxtaposition between multiplexes and these independently owned cinemas. Like there could have been something there too, and it just kind of goes nowhere, and it just kind of fizzles out and doesn't really earn those beats at the end, and becomes a little heavy-handed, a little
it lays it on thick. It lays it on real thick, and it's the closest thing you get to any kind of like true competition when it comes to the new wave of more kind of corporate cinema is when this theater kind of lucks out and gets a premiere of Hugh Hudson's Chariots of Fire, which was a big deal. I mean, that's the Best Picture winner of 1981, and the Vangelis score is amazing, and what we haven't even mentioned the whole subplot with Colin Firth as the manager,
which
and
is,
his
I
icky.
think it's apt that we haven't really mentioned it, because it doesn't even feel super necessary.
Yeah, it's also kind of if last year, a movie that played at TIFF that was not great either, which also had Colin Firth and Olivia Colman, Mothering Sunday. It just kind of feels like, I get Sam Mendes just worked with him, and in 1917, but it doesn't feel like you necessarily needed Colin Firth to play that
character
role.
in it either.
And I rather have much spent more time with sort of the idiosyncratic characters that work at this movie theater and getting the dynamic of that. And I think Michael Ward has something. He was really good in Steve McQueen's small acts anthology, Lovers Rock.
Cool.
It's cool to see I
think he's good in the movie. It's just not given
I mean, all the characters are superficial at best, and it's almost dependent on them bringing more to it than what is written on the page. And again, it just kind of feels like Sam Mendes had maybe the smallest inkling of an idea, but didn't really take the time to develop anything
a
further.
Great story or anything.
Yeah, it's such a paper thin plot,
and
yet there's still a lot of plot, a lot of storylines that really aren't all that interesting, even though they could be on their own if that was the focus, but it's never the focus. It's more so to fill a film and make it 2 hours long.
I didn't hate it while I was watching it. The more I talk about it, the more I'm like, okay, maybe I only like those beginning moments, and then realized how quickly it kind of fizzled out for me.
And I'm getting sick of somebody watching a movie and being awe-inspired by it in a close-up, even if it is a great
I'm
as great an actor as Olivia Colman.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. It's that classic shot of them alone in a theater,
the cinema paradiso.
The light on their face as it's going. Absolutely. I'm fine with it. It just needs to be earned, or it needs to because I get it. I really do. Me and you, we fucking love the movies, and I love those types of movie theaters, and I love being awe-inspired by a movie where you don't
love
focus
Maltesers.
You don't focus on anyone. You're more of a Malteser boy than
it's
me.
a very British thing.
Yeah.
They're called something else in the U.S., which is always weird. I can't
Are
remember
they?
the name
They're
of it.
Maltesers here, though.
Yeah, no.
They're gob stuff.
There's some. If anybody's listening to this and it's from the U.S., let us know. I remember Rhett and Link were talking about it once, and they're the same exact thing. They're just not called Maltesers. That's the British thing, and that translates in Canada as well.
Interesting.
But yeah, I am a Maltesers guy.
But anyways, I actually do like that idea, because I feel like I do feel that, and I understand that. It's just make me feel that your characters actually feel that.
I thought you were going to say make me a believer.
Yeah, well, that too.
But that's the thing. That's the power of cinema, right?
Yeah.
Where it transports you to a time and place, and you get to see a perspective that you might not be as traditionally kind of accustomed to. And I like the idea of almost like a cottage country vacation location being the central kind of sticking point. It's also just interesting to see a different side of England, being a beach community, because when you think of English films in general, you
rainy
think rainy kind of beautiful scenic kind of green or kind of more industrial stuff with the city. Like this kind of almost looks like it takes place at like in Cannes or something like that, you know, like with the kind of look.
Yeah.
And I even like that it starts, you know, at the end of the year and it begins a new year. And as we learn about Coleman's character, we learn that, you know, she's struggled in the past, but even the way that it deals with schizophrenia, or like the conversation that she's taking lithium pills, which, you know, lithium pills, if you take them over a long period of time, can do serious, because it's like lithium batteries, right? Like it's lithium, can do serious damage to your kidneys. And like at the beginning of the film, the doctor, you know, has this line saying like, you know, lithium pills are excellent, they're wonderful. And that was when, you know, like they were being used in the way that we'll talk about, you know, the opioid crisis with all the beauty and the bloodshed. So like even that is an interesting
angle, but
kernel,
never
but it's
really,
not really anything explored. And then when we have that moment of true confrontation between those two characters, it just kind of feels a little bit disingenuous.
Yeah, I agree. Didn't hate it.
Didn't hate, wasn't great.
I'm very critical of it because I feel like it should have been better than it is.
Given everybody that's working on it.
Yeah, so I'm going to give it a soft pass at a 3 because while watching it, I liked elements of it. But I could easily go lower than that, but I'm being kind with a 3, I think.
I'm going to give it a 2. That's what it deserves.
That's the classic Marchin 2, you know? Not great, not unwatchable,
good,
but like close to it.
This time next year, will we even remember it?
We should have. That's what's unfortunate.
But there's always one of these movies. I mean, we were even talking about this a little bit with The Fabelmans, where, like, you know, there's part of that kind of auto-fiction inspired by, you know, personal journeys to the cinema, and like
movies about movies. People love
Belfast. I mean, you know, some are good, some are bad, but there's been a lot of them in the last little bit, and I feel like, you know, even at the end of this year, we're going to be getting, you know, Damien Chazelle's Babylon, which just had the trailer premiere, which basically looks like a more raunchier. It's The Artist, but if The Artist fucked.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like that's kind of what it looks like.
Okay, I haven't watched the trailer yet, so I'll trust you on that. Thank you all for listening. We really do appreciate it. We are in the midst of TIFF 2022. Go check out all of our reviews. The aforementioned Fabelmans you guys can check out. Glass Onion, a new Knives Out mystery. Go check that out. Women Talking should be up for you guys now. All the Beauty and the Bloodshed. Bros, Brother, The Swimmers. We have tons of stuff up. So go check out all of our TIFF reviews right here on Untitled Movie Reviews, or on YouTube at I already mentioned the podcast.
You're drunk, go home, Matt.
On YouTube at Untitled Movie Podcast, as well as your one-stop shop for everything. Just head over to Letterboxd, which is Untitled_movies. Go check out not me physically, but my work on Family Feud Canada. It starts, it's airing right now, Monday through Thursday, 7:30 p.m. on CBC and CBC Gem. Go check that out, as well as follow me on all those social medias at Matt Warbeck.
And I'm Eric Marchin. You can find more of my video reviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
The movies.
The movies.